Well, hey, welcome to a sermon on a trip around the sun. Mark Batterson wrote a book that really after a short while, I think the gist was pretty simple to follow along with. You are welcome to get the book. I encourage it. It's a good read. It's an easy read. And it has some wonderful tidbits about how to have a deeper relationship with the Lord. I have to admit, I really grabbed the title as much as I would the premise of the book, but I think it does speak volumes to us in a new year. Everybody had talked about January. You've heard people say, I have a New Year's resolution, going to make a New Year's resolution. And I think the challenge that I wanted to present with this sermon series to start the new year was that it's not about incremental change. We want to lose a few pounds, we want to get a better budget, we want to save a little extra money, and maybe you want to do things a little bit differently. You want to cuss less, or you want to spend more time with the people you love, and you're going to try to plan that. And then all of a sudden, all the things you planned don't seem to stay together, and they come unraveled, and 3 weeks into the new year, you've broken all your New Year's resolutions, right? What if you were to plan this year, instead of something to start with every day, something to happen in a few months or at some point in the course of the year, that when it happens, so many people are aware about it, so many people are planning on it, that it will happen. And then when you plan that and it is something you're expecting to do, you can't go back from it. It is transformative. What would that look like? I think that's the purpose of this A Trip Around the Sun, is to challenge us in our Christian faith to not try to tiptoe into the pool, but literally to take a leap off the ledge so that when you leave it, there's no going back. There's the metaphor of jumping out of a plane, right? Now you're going to get the parachute on and you're absolutely terrified. But the thing is, if you actually make the decision to leave the plane, there is no going back. You're not going to turn around and get back into the plane. In fact, the more you focus on the past, you are really missing the priority, which is to find the landing spot or the earth that you know you're not going to miss. You're going to have to get focused on the new reality and pull the ripcord and have the parachute. And that scene and that scenery, to even see it from afar, from somebody else's video camera or Go camera, and you look at it and go, oh my gosh, they've done something that I don't know that I'd have the guts to do. But if you do it, you wonder about the splendor of the earth from that view as it comes into view. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus calls the first disciples, and what we're talking about this January is this desire to make this decision in some part of our life that there is no going back. Jesus says, come follow me and I will make you fishers of people. And the early disciples leave their fishing boats right there and they go to follow Jesus. Now they do that because certainly we could look into it and say their lives didn't seem to really have much going for them. I mean, they woke up every day basically trying to fight for survival. They went back to the same boat and the same fishing holes, and then maybe they tweak it a little bit to find a better fishing hole, but essentially they lived in very close proximity to the place that they were born, to the place that they were going to die. And not much changed in between. It's kind of an ordinary existence. And so we look at it and say, well, no wonder they would want to follow Jesus, this adventure, right? Well, I kind of laugh because in today's world, we have all the freedoms and amenities you could ever want. We literally can go anywhere in the world. You can get on a plane, and if you decide to go to the other side of the earth, or you want to go to even as much as another state, you can pick up tomorrow, get in your car, and you can go there. And you can be there before dinner. The thing that's funny is we're really creatures of habit still. We don't change that much. In fact, we really spend more of our lives still trying to control our environment so that it's ordinary, normal, and predictable. And so I asked this question. You only get so many trips around the sun. The average is 78. What are some monumental moments in your life that you stepped out on faith or in a decision decided that this is something I need to do, and when you do it, you're no longer the same person? I remember that day when my wife and I said our vows. And even though it was just a simple few words, and even though it was just an aisle that she came up or I walked in from the side, those few steps to meeting each other and saying those vows, we never were the same. the two became one. Maybe you walk up across the stage and get your diploma and you realize there's no going back. That what you've experienced, if you graduate high school, you can't go back to high school. You get the diploma and it represents, in that small amount of space that you just traveled, something transformative has happened. I also ask people in the church all the time, can you, at that last song, reflect on the wisdom of the word and hopefully the pieces of the message that speak to the word. And our culmination of that moment is to say this invitation or to sing this closing song where we invite people to step out on faith. And how many people have told me, I wanted to come forward, but I just couldn't. That 10 or 15 feet to make that public display of humility and confession and repentance, this what we call it a moment of salvation, this desire to make a public proclamation, a willingness to be baptized. That decision, as small as steps as you have to go, seem to be impossible to cross. And I think the same is true about our relationship with Jesus. Now, sure, many of us want to consider what Jesus can do for us, and so asking, our lives don't change a whole lot. Doesn't seem to be too complicated to try to invite God into our space as long as He keeps things in the controlled world that we've created. That we get up, we get dressed, we go to work, we get done from work, we run around to the same locations for the same games or the same practices or the same meetings, and then we get the weekend and maybe you try the same activities. We don't change a whole lot, do we? And then you go to church, and as long as church is within the hour, you can get out and go to lunch. I mean, heaven forbid the Holy Spirit show up and there be an outpouring, and we'd be there like 3 hours, and then we know that. And that's the world we ask God into. We say, God, come into my boat. And Jesus says, no, I'm calling you out. Come, follow me. There's a story that makes it even more complicated. So in Matthew 14, Jesus decides to send the crowd and then go up and spend some time on his own. And after doing so, he's going to meet the disciples. The problem is that while they were crossing the Sea of Galilee, towards the evening, it became night. And it is about 3 o'clock in the morning that they're out in the Sea of Galilee and overwhelmed with waves and a storm. Now, these are professional fishermen, so there's no understanding, there's no common sense to why they would be afraid of something if it was manageable. So this had to be a severe storm. And just then they see a ghost, a figure that comes walking towards them on the water. And Jesus cries out to them and they realize who it is. And at that moment, this is my favorite moment. Of course, all the disciples are thinking, get in the boat, get in the boat. Maybe you can calm things and make our life normal again. But that moment, Simon Peter does something extraordinary. He says, Jesus, call me to you and I will come. And Jesus says, come forth. And this is one of the favorite moments of the story. That we've told this story so many ways, but think about Simon Peter getting out of the boat to walk to Jesus. It says he goes so far and then all of a sudden he's overwhelmed by the waves. They're crashing in on him, the wind, and he begins to sink. And then Jesus has to grab him and say, you have little faith. How do you not have faith? I tell you why I think we struggle with faith. Because I think we want God to come into the boat with us and to make our world calm again. And then we say things like, well, I will make those steps. I'll go out on faith. But then we have this romantic understanding of Christianity that says when I get out of the boat, the waves will stop, right? Like going to Jesus means my world's going to be calmer and restful. I'm going to become a Christian. All my problems are going to go away. But Peter gets out of the boat and it actually gets worse. He's put himself in a situation where he's no longer protected by the boat at all. He's more vulnerable to the waves and to the wind. And I think that's what Jesus calls us into. It's not a world of perfect peace, but it is an adventure. And it's one of those that I can imagine Peter saying to the disciples later, I was terrified. I don't even know why I got out of the boat. But for a moment, I walked on water. That experience in that year of Peter's life has shaped him. You know, the disciples experienced many moments with Jesus, even the tragedy of his death. ultimately the realization that they abandoned him in his moment of death. But Jesus told all his disciples, take up your cross and follow me. Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Cost of Discipleship, when Jesus bids a man, he bids him come and die. Jesus doesn't call us out of the storm and into the peace. He calls us out of the ordinary into the extraordinary opportunities he has for us. I think that the trip around the sun this year, my hope for us as a church is that we'll make decisions in our lives that we can't go back from. That once we take the step out of the plane, we can't turn around and get back in. We're going to have to pull the ripcord, this Christ cord of faith. And we're going to have to let Jesus just take us. As terrifying as it may be, I'd like to encourage families to do that by taking, instead of a vacation, take a mission trip this year. Go somewhere that you wouldn't normally go. I encourage people who are still questioning their faith to make the step and the decision to follow Jesus, to have that public baptism, make a profession of faith. I encourage people who are a bit narcissistic and full of themselves and surround themselves with their own perfect, ordinary world to get outside of their comfort zone. Volunteer 3 hours a week. Make that commitment to say, I'm going to get into a commitment that people are relying on me to honor that commitment. We have some wonderful ministries at the church, but even if it's not within the church, if you do it for Christ wherever you are, be held accountable to the people around you. You might be surprised at what this year will look like when you decide to step out of the boat. You might just walk on water. Amen.